我尋晚冇發夢見到你喎。
嘅，你都冇瞓，咁冇用，你一定會見到我。
As the film begins, we see a man, who we later learn is called Yuddy, walking into a shop to buy a bottle of Coke. He asks the girl behind the counter for her name. She doesn't give it to him, but he says he knows it already, and tells her that it's Su Li Jen. He then says she'll see him in her dreams. He returns again the next day, and the day after. He tells Li Jen to look at his watch for 1 minute. She does, and he says he will always remember that minute. 2:59 on April 16th, 1960, and that now they are 1 minute friends. It's sometime in the future, and we see the two of them in bed together. She asks if he would marry her, and he says no. She leaves, and she says she's never coming back. In the next scene, Yuddy goes to his mother's house and finds her drunk. He helps her to get into bed, and then goes to find the man who his mother has been dating. He beats the man up because he stole some earrings from his mother. He gets the earrings back and offers them to a dancer who is changing in the next room. She comes back with him to his apartment. At first she plays hard to get, but eventually they kiss and go to bed together. The next morning she bumps into Yuddy's friend on the way out. He asks her what she does for work, and she dances for him and tells him to guess. She then tells him her name is Mimi. We then hear Yuddy's voice telling us a story about a bird that has no legs.
我聽人講呢個世界有種雀仔冇腳嘅，佢只可以一直咁飛啊飛，飛到攰嗰陣就喺啲風入邊瞓覺。呢種雀仔一世只可以落地一次，嗰次就係佢死嘅時候。
Later, in a cafe, Yuddy and his mother are talking. We learn that she is his adopted mother, and Yuddy wants her to tell him who his biological mother is. But she refuses, saying that there's nothing in it for her. In the next scene, we see Li Jen waiting at the bottom of Yuddy's apartment. A police officer goes to get Yuddy, and he comes down to see her. She says she has come to get her things, but then later admits that she wants to get back with him. He says that he is no good for her, and goes into his apartment to get her things. Inside the apartment, he argues with Mimi. Then Li Jen walks in to say that she is leaving. Mimi also says she's leaving. Yuddy tells her not to come back if she does, and in the end, she stays. Outside, it's raining heavily. The policeman is doing his rounds and sees Li Jen. She borrows some money from him for a cab and comes back another day to repay him. The policeman sees that she keeps returning to Yuddy's apartment. He tells her that she needs to make up her mind. Either tell Yuddy she loves him, or pretend that she doesn't know him and move on. She chooses to forget him, and her and the policeman go for a walk together. We learn that the policeman grew up poor. He wanted to be a sailor, but became a policeman to stay close to his sick mother. He tells her to come back and talk to him again sometime, or call him at the payphone. We then hear a voiceover from the policeman. He says that he never really expected Li Jen to call, but he would stop by the payphone each time he passed it, and wait for a little while anyway. Soon after, his mother passed away, and he became a sailor. Later we see Yuddy in the apartment of his adopted mother. She says that she's going to America. Yuddy says that he will make her stay with him. He is obviously trying to hurt her and ruin her plans because she refuses to tell him who his biological mother is. In the end, she concedes and says his biological mother is in the Philippines and shows him letters from her. In a cafe, we see Yuddy telling his friend he's leaving. He says that if Mimi asks, to tell her that he's gone. He then gives his card to his friend. In the next scene, Mimi goes to the stadium and asks Li Jen if she knows where Yuddy is. She accuses Li Jen of seeing him, and they argue. Li Jen says that Yuddy treats all women badly. Mimi continues to look for Yuddy at his adopted mother's house. When she leaves, we see Yuddy's adopted mother with a much younger man. He resembles Yuddy. Mimi eventually learns from Yodi's friend that he has gone to the Philippines. We see Mimi walking in the rain, and the friend follows her in Yodi's old car. She tells him to stop following her and says she'll never love him. They argue, and he slaps her. Later, in the cafe, the friend gives Mimi money. He says he sold the car and she can have the money to go to the Philippines, but if she can't find Yodi, she can come back to him. In the next scene, we see a very grand house and hear Yodi's voice saying that he arrived at where his biological mother lives, but she refused to see him. We then see the former policeman checking into a hotel, evidently in the Philippines. We see Yodi on the street with a girl. He is extremely drunk. He eventually passes out and the girl robs him. The former policeman finds Yodi and brings him back to his room. Yodi asks him where he's from. It is clear that he doesn't remember him. They continue to talk and we learn that Yodi needs to be at the train station at dawn. Early in the morning, Yodi is at the train station and the former policeman is there also. A man walks in and comes to Yodi. Soon a large crowd of men come into the train station. Yodi is in the bathroom with the man, and we learn that Yodi is buying an American passport from him. The man selling it wants his money. Yodi says he doesn't have any money, and stabs the man. Yodi calmly walks out of the bathroom, but then the stabbed man comes out and shouts to stop Yodi. A mass brawl ensues, and the former policeman shoots a number of people. They run across the rooftop and make it into a train and escape. They sit on the train and argue. Yodi starts to tell the story about the bird that has no legs, but the former policeman interrupts him. He doesn't fall for Yodi's charms and calls him out. He walks off to ask how long there is until the next station, and then a man comes and shoots Yodi. We then hear a voiceover of Yodi's adopted mother telling of how she ended up with Yodi, and how she was happy as her financial worries were over because she'd receive $50 a month from his real family until he was 18. Yodi sits dying on the train. He tells the story of the bird with no legs. But this time, he says that actually the bird never flew anywhere. It was dead from the beginning. The former policeman asks Yodi what he was doing at 2:59 on April the 16th, 1960. Yodi remembers and asks after Lee Jen. We then see Mimi arrive in the Philippines. She goes to the same hotel that Yodi and the former policeman stayed at and asks after Yodi. We see Lee Jen at the stadium selling tickets. She tries to call the phone booth, but no one picks up the phone. In the final shot, we see a stylish young man getting ready to go out. He has some resemblance to Yodi. The film ends. The first thing that stood out to me about this film was how incredibly stylish it is. From the way that the characters dress to the soundtrack used, almost everything about the film screams cool. Yodi seems to have coolness almost dripping off him. During the early parts of the film, he's very much the archetype of a slick young rebel. He's effortlessly stylish, he plays by his own rules, he's laid back and he can wrap girls around his finger. He's the kind of character that many young men would look up to and fantasize about being like. Such a character could easily be one-dimensional or become a caricature. However, the film quickly shows us that Yodi has much more depth. We learn that he is desperate to find his real mother, and this desperation leads to barely suppressed anger and feelings of hopelessness and depression that occasionally pierce the surface. As the film goes on, it becomes clear that he is also a tragic character, unable to be at peace with himself. We eventually see through his attempts to dress his restlessness up as wanderlust, and we see that the way he treats others is not only the result of cool self-assurance, but also callous disregard and selfishness. By the end of the film, our envy for his coolness has mostly turned into pity. The scene in which Yodi stabs the man for the passport seems a little out of place to me. Up until that point, Yodi had mostly been a lovable rogue type character, obviously not moral or upright in any traditional sense, but likewise not really bad in a villainous way. By stealing from and then stabbing a person, he suddenly becomes much more despicable. The man selling the passport is presented to us as a very bad person. We therefore need not have sympathy for him, but nevertheless, seeing Yodi stab him so callously does make Yodi appear truly amoral in a way he had not done before. Perhaps this was necessary to stop the audience feeling overly sad when he is later shot. It makes his death seem, if not justified, then at least an inevitable result of his lifestyle. Nevertheless, the scene doesn't sit well with me. One of the standout things about this film is how brilliantly it's acted. There is not a single poorly delivered line or unbelievable moment. Some of the most well-acted scenes are those featuring Yuri's adopted mother. The actress's performance is understated, and she uses subtle looks and tone of voice to show us the complexity of the character. She gives us a character who is at once dignified but also pitiful, and she does a great job of allowing the character's sorrow to pierce through the veneer of self-assurance. Yuri's adopted mother is perhaps the most complex character in the film. It is never clear what exactly her motives are. It is possible to think that she is truly a loving mother, desperate to see her adopted son love her, or that she just selfishly wants his affection, or even that she is malicious and enjoys causing him pain for its own sake. It may of course be a mix of all these three. Her relationship and feelings towards Yuri also sometimes appear to take on an Oedipal quality. This is most evident when we see that her latest toy boy looks strikingly like Yuri himself. An interesting thing about the cinematography of this film is that there are very few long shots used. It uses almost exclusively mid-shots, close-ups, and extreme close-ups. This is very much a character-driven film, and I think that the use of such shooting techniques helps us to focus on the characters and not get distracted. It also makes the film feel very intimate and draws you into the story. The final scene is quite unusual. It does not seem to relate to the story in any way. From a casting perspective, it's also interesting, as at the time, Tony Leung was one of the biggest stars in Asian cinema, and is still one of its most recognisable faces. Yet he has no lines in the film, and only appears on screen for 2 minutes. It's hard to figure out exactly what the purpose of the final shot is. The character in this shot does bear some resemblance to Yuri, and his dress and manner also make him look like a young rebel type character. Perhaps his appearance here shows us that Yuri is something of an archetype, embodied by many before and after him. Or perhaps it was a purely stylistic choice, by a director famous for defying conventions of narrative and paying great attention to aesthetics. Or maybe it's something else entirely, I'm not sure. But not knowing does not in any way detract from my overall enjoyment of the film. Days of Being Wild stuck with me for quite some time after watching it. Aside from the simple yet engrossing story, great cinematography and incredible acting, what made me keep thinking about this film was the character of Yuri. I want to admire him for being so cool and stylish, but I can't, because his amorality, selfishness, and ultimate pitifulness are not at all admirable. I would highly recommend Days of Being Wild to everyone, but if you're a man who has ever fancied himself as a bit of a rebel, then I would especially recommend watching this film to you, as I think Yuri's character will have a lasting impact on you.